Hey folks, this is Drew Burdick with the Building Great Experiences podcast. With me today, I've got Justin Fischgrund, the principal at Fischgrund Consulting. Justin and I met probably about 2 months ago and had a really phenomenal conversation on customer experience and product, and just wanted to have him on the show to talk a little bit more about that.
Thanks, Drew. I appreciate you having me on. Looking forward to chatting with you. I know we share a lot of similar insights and background and philosophy, so looking forward to chatting with you over the next 45 minutes or so. So Justin Fischgrund, consulting business that specializes really in the intersection between human-centered design, product strategy, process optimization. I've been pushing those methodologies throughout my entire career, whether it's naval aviation, retail, manufacturing, really big on the customer experience, taking a human-centered design approach, solving real problems with solutions, and especially nowadays with the AI revolution, it's even more important than ever. So I pride myself in making sure that, from a client perspective, from a technology standpoint, always thinking about it from a true product lens.
So, well, I wanted to start off by defining product, because I think, some people have a opinion of what it is, what it isn't. And so I just wanted to hear from your, perspective. What is product? Why does it matter? How does it intersect with customer experience?
Yeah, product management, in my opinion, is one of the most misunderstood job titles, because many organizations that you find, they use the same title but define it completely different. And you can be a product manager in a company and come and have completely different roles. From my perspective, product management is all about strategically driving the development, the launch, and the support of your end-to-end company's service product offering. A wide variety of skills that intersect between the business and technology, from conducting market research, defining a product strategy, collaborating cross-functionally, whether it's software engineering, QA, UX, managing the product lifecycle from a marketing perspective, from an operations standpoint. At the end of the day, the goal of the product manager is to work through the balanced team from stakeholder perspective, UX design, partner, software engineering, to build products that meet the needs of customers and also drive company objectives that achieve product market fit. And I always see companies that are looking at their product managers like project managers, order takers, just driving a backlog, putting in Jira tickets and moving them forward, or not getting the most out of their product management organization. And it's all about, how do we look at from a customer lens, delivering a product that's delivers viable, valuable, usable, and feasible. And that's where the customer lens comes into play here.
Well, yeah, it's interesting you bring up the desirable, feasible, viable Venn diagram. I think that there's a tendency that I've seen a lot of times with organizations where they might skew or bias towards one of those circles. Like, for example, I've worked with, you probably have too, tons of organizations that they emphasize or overemphasize the feasibility of something, right? Like, hey, it's feasible, or like, hey, it works, right? The thing functions, it's good enough, and doesn't actually create value for the customer, value for the business. Sometimes companies will focus heavily on, it's creating value for us as a business and we can build it, but then they completely neglect the fact that the customer doesn't care, doesn't want it, doesn't need it, and then there's the rare few that actually focus on the three of those things, right? That I think companies like Apple really do well, right? There's a lot of businesses that are at that, top tier brand that are delivering all three. What are your thoughts on how companies can stay in the sweet spot, right? Stay in that zone between those three circles. I think it's hard, right? But I think there are some practical ways to ensure that you're doing all three.
And just building on what you said, hit the nail on the head, what I've seen throughout, my career. Many organizations look at it and say, we can build it, let's go do it, right? It's feasible. Again, AI, you hear all these things. Like, everyone's doing AI. We have the smart team of people who can build algorithm A and B, and it always comes down to, is it going to be user desirable, effective, and the right solution for your business? Just because you can do it doesn't mean you should, because it becomes an opportunity cost for your business. Are you leveraging your capital investments, your time, your people's energy and effort and money appropriately by going after a solution that may not have the right fit? So I'm a big believer of that Venn diagram, in terms of that it's a microcosm. So how you think about the balanced team from a product management, design, and engineering perspective. Then you obviously have the business stakeholders. Is it feasible from a technical engineering standpoint? Is it going to be viable from a business value standpoint? Is it going to be usable from a customer standpoint? And one of the easiest ways that I've found to hit the sweet spot between that is having a balanced product team. Many organizations don't operate in that model. Typical product manager, maybe have a product owner who's taking direction from a stakeholder who doesn't have full context around that lens, and they're just writing the Jira stories and pointing them and sending them off to the engineer who's then getting a wireframe from a UI designer, throwing it over kind of on the fence and saying, work through it. And you don't have that team in sync in the agile model. And I'm not saying agile with like the big A of following the agile methodology down to the T, right? Because sometimes you can follow it so closely that you're not agile. I'm saying having a team that works in sync with sprints and stand-ups and iterative planning meetings and making sure you're getting that balanced perspective, because you're having the product manager, the UX designer, the software engineering team, all keeping each other in check, thinking about their domain, but also being empathetic and understanding of the intersection of it. So that's one of the easiest ways, in my opinion, is really embracing that model and really leaning in on the fact that if you want to deliver an exceptional digital technology experience, it needs to have the look and feel and the perspective of the entire balanced team holistically. And that means including engineers in your discovery. And that's always a talking point I would say is, well, why do I want to have my engineers spending time not on keyboard writing code, right? And in the day, I'm not saying they're 100% allocated to discovery like a product manager and a designer are, but when you integrate them early into the process and you have them understand why you're building a product and the value it is and what the problems it's going to solve for the users, they end up delivering a more robust experience. Just because they could have done it a certain way, they understand the viability and usability, and they have a better insight in terms of how they should build a product.
Yeah, I can't agree more. The embedding designers, developers, product folks, researchers into the discovery process, I think is super valuable, because I think sometimes we tend to silo ourselves, right? Like to your point, it's like, oh, I don't want an engineer spending time on this. I'd rather him coding. And the problem with that is like that person doesn't have the context. So they're coding with no like awareness of what a customer is actually saying. I remember there's a point in my career, one of my most favorite memories, I worked with a team where the engineering leader and I sat together like side by side in an actual little pod. And then our teams were all around us. And we would just get up in the middle of like, middle of the day and stand up. We start whiteboarding together, and all of us would be jamming, and we would be listening to the users and like what they were saying. And then, we're actually like solving the problem together. And I think that, sometimes organizations fixate on these metrics like story points and velocity and burn down reports and all these things. They miss the script, right? It's like, don't let the process get in the way of you actually solving the problem for your user, your customer, right? Whoever the digital thing is for. And don't let like the dogma of like, well, they're supposed to code and this person's supposed to design and this person's supposed to do it's like, don't get dogmatic about this stuff. Like we're all humans and we all need context to be able to do our jobs well. And so I think you're totally spot on, like having each of those different players in the mix during the discovery process. And ideally, like, as you're shipping features and functionality consistently, you have that tight feedback loop where, developers, designers, and product folks can all hear the same feedback and then work together to figure out what are we going to do about it, rather than being, one person off in an ivory tower deciding like, oh, this is what this means. You know what I mean?
Definitely. Yeah. Completely agree with that piece. And that's where I mentioned, like, I don't mean big A from an agile perspective of, I'm a big believer of the agile methodologies, but, it's not only about the data in terms of storyboarding, because, the inputs and the outputs of what that actually means in the burn down charts. I'm a bigger believer in making sure you have that balanced team who's doing the continuous discovery after you launch a feature and going in and understanding the insights of how that feature did or did not achieve the objective and working together to brainstorm how you could iterate on the roadmap, right? Yes, a certain role, maybe product manager, designer, depending on in terms of what the specific activity is, could be leading that, but doesn't mean that they make that decision on their own island by themselves. And that's how you can achieve the Venn diagram in terms of the overlap. And then it's about listening to the customers, to your point, right? You want to listen to the business, the stakeholders, understand the key business objectives so that it's a viable and valuable solution. But you also need to understand how it's going to impact the customers. And going and talk about discovery, it's not taking a solution from a stakeholder and figuring out how to implement that. It's understanding what the stakeholders say in terms of the behaviors and the metrics they want to achieve, and then matching those with customer interviews, sentiment analysis, whatever the tool you might need to do to determine the best way to solve that problem.
So this conversation kind of reminds me of a few things that I've seen in my time. Depending on what size and scale and maturity level an organization is, also determines how they build product, how they deliver product and value to their customer. Some organizations, they're thousands of people. They've got thousands of products. Previously I worked at a large insurance company, and it was a 50,000 person company with, I don't know, probably 2,000 products, digital products. And at that scale, it's a different set of challenges and complexity, which requires a much more, people with really clearly defined roles and responsibilities and governance and all these things. But then when you're a much smaller organization, when you're like a mid-sized company, maybe you have 100 employees or 200 employees, you don't have the luxury of, saying like engineering does this and design does this and product does that and research does this. Like you have to kind of make do with what you've got. And what I've seen often is people who are more like vocal, charismatic leaders, they tend to like skew the balance of the force, right? So if you've got a really outspoken, charismatic CTO at an organization, that organization typically will skew to like technology first, right? Like technology is sort of leading the charge. Similarly, if you have a chief product officer, for example, and that person is extremely outgoing and charismatic and kind of rallies the attention and, the troops, so to speak, then you'll be more of like a product-led organization. And something I think is organizations that are doing it well are experience-led, not design-led. Like I think I've gotten some folks that give me like a dirty, stink eye when I say experience-led, because they're like, oh, well, Drew, you just think design's supposed to lead everything. No. That's not what I'm saying. I think it's experience in the sense that everyone, product engineering and design should be anchoring to like what's going to create a great experience for the user, the customer, or whatever. And if you do that, the score takes care of itself, right? Like the outcomes, the business value will come from that because your customers are going to become lifelong loyal customers. They're going to buy more stuff. They're, going to tell all their friends about it. They're going to refer more people to you, and they're going to use your product. And so I think that being experience-led as an organization is incredibly important versus, like product-led, technology-led, design-led, like all these capabilities that are kind of like vying for their piece of the pie or vying for power. Like, no, customer, right? Put customer at the center of what you're doing. Think about what they care about. Think about what they need. Think about how you create value for them. What are they ultimately trying to accomplish? Orient to that. And all, product design engineering should be in service of that mission, right?
Yeah, no, I agree with that. Customer focus, and then everything kind of takes care of itself. And obviously you want to be customer focused while being a viable business within reason, of course, but I couldn't agree more in terms of the organizations that I've seen succeed are ones who have that mindset, are very in tune with their customers, right? And that's where, from teams that I've been part of and I've led, we always have a focus on whether it's an internal customer or an external customer, right? Someone who works for an organization, the user of an application or experience of an internal tool or external. It's all about going to the place of work for them and talking to them and seeing the challenges and the pain points, because from there, I guarantee you can find solutions that are going to meet your business objectives that are also going to delight your customers. And it's kind of that merge between the two. And if you don't have that customer focus and you're taking direct team members sitting behind their computer, their desk, who think they have an idea of where to go next, and they're looking at numbers on a screen of theory versus practical reality, you're going to have a really difficult time building solutions and capabilities that are going to suffice and meet that kind of third part of the Venn diagram from a usable perspective. It might sound great on paper, but if you end up going and doing the iterative part of the development and understanding how the solution impacted the core metrics that you set out to, and that's an if, right? Because many companies build something and then move on. might find that the solution you implemented didn't even move the needle in terms of where you want to be. And I guess it's because you tried to solve a problem that wasn't worth solving. It didn't have value. You weren't able to achieve product market fit throughout that journey.
Yeah. So let's shift gears into like who's doing this well. Who is bringing product and experience together in a really great way and creating value for customers.
Sure. I love that question because I kind of equate it, my background being in like the Lean Six Sigma process engineering focus, so the big focus on quality. And something I teach in my class actually as an adjunct professor is the various approaches to quality. You have, like a transcendent, which is the best way to describe that is like that's a high quality product. It's just innate. And then you have like a product base, which is more of like a durable, reliable, and measurable function. And then the third piece, which I tend to believe is one of the more critical functions, is the user base. Those exactly what we're talking about. Those organizations who define quality of identifying the customer problems and solving problems with solutions that the customer would not even have told you, right? And the best companies are solving problems that customers didn't even realize were problems. They're getting ahead of it. Because when companies who, think that they're practicing user-centered design and human-centered approaches, and they go and they ask leading questions or they guide, in terms of what they want to hear, end up seeing and we're paying the price for that. Companies who go in with objective mindsets and truly understanding the pain points and then helping their customers understand where their pain points are and defining solutions for them are the ones that really excelling. And, a couple of the ones, and some of them are the obvious ones, but I think Amazon does a great job of this, right? If you think about it in terms of they're constantly they've redefined how you fulfill experiences, fulfill products in terms of speed of delivery. Like you can go online right now and order something and be at your door in a couple hours. If you think about that, they've solved a problem that customers didn't even realize it had, the instant gratification of having something right away. And now, unfortunately, they set the bar for many other organizations, retailers, where that's the expectation. And even if you're providing 3-day shipping, that's not the bar anymore because the customer problem is that I want to go buy this, whatever this product is, and I want to have it by later day or tomorrow, and they can fulfill upon that. I also think many of the social media platforms, believe it or not, right? They know customer problems or problems better than the customer does, where they're releasing features that are delighting and allowing customers to share whatever they want with their network well beyond that. And we've seen that throughout the years as, Instagram, Facebook, all these companies have released capabilities that if you asked the customer what they wanted, they never would have defined those. But my guess is that those organizations have really robust research and product teams who are truly understanding the root causes of pain points.
Yeah. Those are great examples. So a couple of, obviously the ones that come to mind immediately are like Apple, Airbnb, like et cetera, all this sort of like stuff that you would expect, right? These Silicon Valley based companies that are kind of setting the pace for everybody else. I was thinking about, like what are some ones that are like maybe atypical or unusual, like the ones that people don't normally think about or talk about. And I'll share a recent story. Last week, I went down to rural South Carolina, where there was one of my clients was their manufacturing company, and we were going to visit their plant. And it was funny because I'm driving down the road, I need to get some gas. I pull off at a Circle K, unassuming, regular Circle K, nothing big, whatever. Put gas in the truck, go in to get a coffee, and I'm stunned. Like I'm in the middle of nowhere, South Carolina, and there's this checkout experience that is probably one of the best I've ever had. I take my cup of coffee, I set it on the little counter. There's a camera. It like scans and knows immediately like what I have, how big, how all of that. And then all I got to do is just tap my credit card and I walk away. And I was like, what planet am I on right now? I just got like the most amazing coffee experience from a Circle K in the middle of rural South Carolina. And it blew my mind, and I think there's a lot of really interesting examples of, I'd call it like the less glamorous, less sexy industries that are investing in great, products and great experiences. And companies like a Circle K. Another one, this is a really random one. I don't know if you have this up in Philadelphia, but we have a fast food chain down here called Bojangles. And it's like I don't know, they think of it as like a Chick-fil-A or whatever. It's like a chicken sandwich, chicken, tenders. I was going through drive-through, buying, a thing. And I'm talking to this AI that sounded like It was, I mean, it was like there was a slight uncanny valley, you know, it wasn't flawless, but I'm like, I had like this wonderful conversation with this AI ordering my chicken. And in contrast, I had been to a Wendy's like probably, you know, a week or two before that. And the person was grumpy and frustrated and didn't want to, you know, like clearly didn't like their job, didn't want to talk to me. And it was just, it was so memorable. And so I just think, anyway, I think it's really interesting how there's a lot of these companies that are now investing in enhancing their customer experience through digital products, you know, through these different touch points that are really surprising, right? And like when you
Yeah.
have those moments where you're like, I'm getting a coffee in a rural South Carolina gas station, you don't expect, you know, don't expect it. But it's so memorable that, to be perfectly honest, I'm probably likely to go to a Circle K. I'm more likely to
Yeah.
go to Circle K again next time. Like if there's an Exxon and a BP and a whatever, I'm probably gonna go to Circle K because I'm like, that was a really cool checkout experience. So anyway, that was just, those are two
Yeah.
that
No,
came to
that's a great
mind.
example. Yeah, I love that.
Well, cool. So let's talk about like tips and tricks. What are some of the things that you've seen in your career that have worked really well for companies who are trying to improve the experience of their product, or they're trying to make their product more effective or more valuable for their customers?
Yeah, and I know we've talked about it a few times, but not to belabor the point, but it's truly understanding your customers, right? Having the latitude, if you're a product leader, design leader, technology leader, giving your team the latitude within the guardrails, right? Define to them the outcomes of what you want to achieve, but try to stay away from the outputs, right? So help define where you want to see and what the behaviors you want to get, but don't prescribe specific feature or solution. Give them the latitude to go and understand and do market research and understand the customer needs and pain points and immerse themselves within the experience. Some of the best product solutions that I've delivered throughout my career is because they give it exactly that direction, guidance, clear success metrics in terms of what we wanted to achieve, and then the freedom and even time capacity to go and do the process, observe people, execute the process, right? Like when I was in Dick's Sporting Goods, working in their technology department for in-store experience, I went and worked the footwear deck, which we were building technology over the footwear team members. We went and worked that for 10, 15, 20 days, being able to be given the time capacity to go do that, to really, truly, no better way to understand, be empathetic towards the pain points that an internal customer or customer generate than by doing the process. And that's really, in my opinion, the best way to do that, if possible, right? If you're supporting a process technology, a service that's within reason, of course. So I think that's the number one piece. And then having clear checkpoints and communication within the product team, and then also with the business stakeholders, right? I've seen some product teams who don't have clear communication within their product team organization. They're very connected from a business perspective, but there's often disconnects between what they're doing, why they're doing it, how they should go about doing it with that kind of balanced team we talked about in the past. I've seen some teams who are really in tune with that and they over-index and they forget about the fact that they need to bring their stakeholders along the journey, the ones who are ultimately responsible, potentially depending on the business structure, for the P&L business management. And you need to make sure that from, especially being in a product management and design role, that you're supporting that intersection there. Because at the end of the day, you want to make sure that you have business success, you also have user success, and bringing them along that journey doesn't need to mean that the stakeholders need to be part of every single interview and every single research activity, but including them in some and then bringing them along the journey as you're synthesizing the results and getting to your conclusion. Some teams they're having checkpoints, which is great, but they're not showing some of the details and opening up kind of the look of how they got there. And then they're running into disconnects with stakeholders because the stakeholders were not brought along the journey and they have their opinions, and then they get frustrated from that. In my opinion, you can show insights early and often, even as it's messy. You don't want to get too detailed where you're showing every little nuance because that may not be appropriate to the audience, but you need to open up the hood and be able to explain some of the reasoning of how you got there. It's kind of like when you show your work and you're in school for math, class a while, back in school. Show how you got to that point so that you can gain or some support and buy-in from the end result that you achieved.
Yeah. I like to call it like with, not to, when you're talking about working with stakeholders. I think there's a lot of times people forget that really important really small but important component, which is don't do things to people, do things with people, right? Bring people into the process, involve them, get their involvement in the shaping of the thing so that when you get to the, where you're getting ready to launch something, you don't have somebody coming out of left field saying, oh, I don't agree with this. I didn't sign off on that. And then you're back to the drawing board, right? Yeah, I think there's a couple different things that come to mind for me in terms of tips and tricks. So one is don't play scared, right? I think a lot of organizations are afraid to try things out, even stuff that kind of seems silly. I'm going to tell a quick story. There's a guy that I used to work with. He was formerly with Coca-Cola. Coca-Cola, if you've ever used, they have like these freestyle machines, right? You can like get the different drinks or whatever. So anyways, they wanted to be able to start to measure traffic around these freestyle machines. And they were trying to come up with a solution for how they're going to do this. And they're like, well, we probably need cameras to sort of see the people in front of it and around it. But then they were like, well, and this was, I don't know, probably 10 years ago or something like that. They were like, people are going to get weirded out because they don't want cameras on them. And someone had the bright idea. They were like, what if we just try it out? And instead of actually putting real cameras in it, just print a little sticker of a lens and put it on, I don't know, like a dozen of these freestyle machines and just see what happens. Like if anybody cares. Lo and behold, they put these little, looks like a camera lens sticker on these machines. And it was like 10 or 12 locations around Atlanta. And nobody cared. Nobody even noticed. And it was this like super low fidelity experiment that helped them very quickly validate, like, this is going to be fine. We should do this. And so I think there's this, like, don't play scared, but also like, it doesn't have to be as high fidelity to try things out as you think it might be. I think sometimes in the product and experience world, people, it's like perfect becomes the enemy of great. They're like, I got to have the perfect thing. Like if I don't get it right, it's going to like ruin the experience. And I don't think that's true. I think that you can make small changes and tests and you can do multivariate testing to kind of test and see how, all right, we'll do with this group of people. Let's see if it works or doesn't work. Let's test messaging. Let's test a new feature, new functionality. So don't be afraid to try things out, and if you get it wrong, like just be communicative with your customer, just like you are with stakeholders, right? Like just talk to people and let them know what's going on.
It's an excellent example, by the way. Love that story because throughout my career, I've done a lot of that. Wizard of Oz, there's many trapdoor tests, the experiments, done quite a few of those and going in objective and, trying to run an unbiased experiment to just be able to use that to be able to tell a story in terms of where you should go next. Sometimes fail fast right before you invest too much. And I think that's a great example of how many organizations can think smaller in terms of how do you validate or invalidate an idea before you get too far down where you fell in love with that idea and then you don't want it to fail, so you continue to put more effort into it. So that's a great example.
Yeah. And I mean, people, sometimes they assume that a prototype or, an experiment or a test has to be like, we have to code something. No, you could do like a paper prototype and actually, I've done this within workshops. We'll actually get real users or customers like on a focus group workshop type environment, and we'll have them actually help us paper prototype the thing, right? And so it's like you're getting real customer feedback, real time about the thing, and they're helping you co-create the experience, and it's pretty magical because not only do you have this invaluable insight you wouldn't have got otherwise, but two, like you now have like lifelong customers. They're like, oh, I helped think of this thing. I helped come up with this idea, right? And they go tell all their friends, and you have like super fans now, right? So I think there's a lot of like lower fidelity things that you can do to try stuff out before you go charging down a path. And I think that's like where a lot of companies mess up is they feel like they have to make a big bet. So they point all their resources at this thing and they spend a bunch of time and money on building and shipping something, and they ship it and nobody cares. And they're completely caught off guard. Like, how did we not know this wasn't going to work? And we're like, well, you didn't test anything,
People think build it and they will come, and that couldn't be, there's nothing worse than having a flashy solution that nobody uses, right? That's the worst investment. It's not always about having the flashy solution that, is going to impress everyone. Sometimes it's the most simple solution that solve a real problem, right? And being able to experiment with that first. And especially in this day and age where every company is standing up an AI solution, snap of a finger. Some of those are really valuable and impactful, don't get me wrong. Others we've seen, end up being detrimental in terms of unintended consequences, in terms of what data is, feeding, if it's biased, where it's coming, or what it's pulling from. Applying a human-centered design approach, rapid testing, all the things we've been talking about, apply to AI as well. Just because it's the new flashy tech that everyone's adopting doesn't necessarily mean that it's right for your business or it's right for that specific customer segment.
So, got a bonus question. This one wasn't in the notes. I would love to hear your favorite product story from your career.
Great question. It's tough to choose one. I think it goes along with what I mentioned in terms of the Dick's Sporting Goods store technology experience. When I was there, starting in I think early 2018, we were given the kind of broad, ambiguous space to be able to solve customer journey when it comes to the footwear purchase process, and we spent a lot of time immersing ourselves in the operation, really putting ourselves in the shoes of the internal customers, external customers, and really understanding the pain points and leveraging core product thinking, human-centered design principle in terms of journey mapping, empathy mapping, opportunity trees, and really embracing that model and bringing, engineers and everyone along that journey. Ended up running a similar type of lean experiment where we had converged on this solution where we were going to potentially build out a kiosk where we're going to allow customers to approach it and scan products in the store and be able to tell you if you had it in stock or not. But we didn't want to just build that solution and then see if they would come, right? We wanted to understand if that was something that, nowadays, sitting here a couple of years later, it's pretty common to have digital solutions within a store experience. But, 7 years ago, it wasn't as common. We realized that no matter how flashy, innovative the solution was behind the screen, if people wouldn't even come to approach it, we wouldn't be able to achieve any value with that and solve the business objectives that we had set out for. So we ran an experiment where we put an iPad, the footwear area, and put a sign and said, want to know if we have a shoe in stock, come here. And we looked at the number of people who would approach the kiosk. And then when they got there, obviously it wouldn't work. Is it a dummy experience? We went there, intercepted them, and asked them a little about what they wanted to see. And that helped us achieve two objectives. One, would people be willing to approach this digital experience within a store? And two, what did the people who would have actually used that expect? And that helped us determine what our first minimum viable product would be after we actually started coding things, and what our releases would be, and continue to refine our experience from that initial set of user base, so to speak, right? We ended up, building out a solution that became a patented technology that kind of transformed the way that customers would shop in store for, that brand. But it all started with scrappy learning from truly immersing yourselves, rolling the sleeves up, and starting small and really embracing the model of product thinking and lean software development, trying to find ways to solve customer problems with solutions that were viable and feasible. And, that kind of mirrors, the Venn diagram we talked about, and ended up delivering a solution that people used and delivered value from a business perspective.
That's really cool. Does Dick still have it?
It's still, it's still in the stores, and it's been part of their model as they continue to expand out those stores.
Well, it sounds like I'll have to go check it out.
Yeah.
I have a quick little story
Yeah.
to kind of wrap us up. So one of my favorite product stories, about 5-6 years ago, it's probably 6 years ago now, I was working for a large insurance company I mentioned earlier, and my boss at the time was like, hey, Drew, I want you to get on a plane to London, birthplace of insurance, like 2 weeks from now, and we're going to go do this like design sprint, which if you're not familiar, it's like Google Ventures design sprint, right? 1 week long kind of effort. And I was like, okay, yeah, that sounds great. Like, actually at the time I'd never been to London before. I'm like, I love traveling. This sounds like a phenomenal thing. So anyways, typical design sprint, it's a week. You have like activities Monday through Friday. And a lot of it is you're basically taking a lot of assumptions and like sort of information from stakeholders' brains to then go prototype something to test with real users. Well, my teammates and I, we were like, well, let's get some context before we show up. So don't just show up in London and be like, hey, everyone, we don't know anything, right? So the problem statement in effect was brokers, insurance brokers, are a little old school, right? They're much more like pen, paper, handshake, take people to beer kind of thing. And, so they were trying to figure out like, how do we get brokers to actually like put information somewhere so that like we can make it easier for people to share knowledge and will drive business forward. And so over the course of like 2 weeks before we went to London, we actually had like interviews and conversations with these different brokers, to underwriters, claims adjusters, people like that. Started to really contextualize this problem area. And specifically because like we're in the US, they're in the UK, we wanted to make sure we understood the cultural nuances too, right? There was like, we had been doing a lot of different work within insurance in the US, but the UK is a different story. So that work, tremendous insights we gleaned from that. And then we showed up on the week of, and it was probably one of the funnest environments because it was folks from my team that flew over from the US, like New York and Charlotte. We had researchers and designers, boss, and then we had engineers, and then we had the actual underwriters, brokers, and claims adjusters there as well. And we kind of all together did, through a series of activities and workshops, co-created this like paper prototype of this app. Then one of my teammates, we had the bright idea. I don't know why we thought this was a good idea. We're like, we're gonna end this sprint or this design sprint with a like a hackathon at the end, an overnight hackathon, 24-hour hackathon, where we're gonna like design and build an actual app so that we can put it in the CEO of EMEA's hand, the European, Middle East, Asian region, the CEO of the EMEA region's hands at the end of the week. That was probably like one of the most like, I don't know how I pulled it off, but I stayed up for like 34 hours straight. I'm just like going crazy and designing this thing. And then we had engineers who were building this stuff. Anyway, we got it done. It was a phenomenal experience. But one of the things that I think were the key takeaways for me was, one, you can do way more than what you think you can in like a week.
Definitely.
Two, like a lot of people use design sprints as kind of like a, like it's the cure-all, right? Like, oh, you had a problem? Design sprint. And I think it's partly because Silicon Valley's kind of adopted this thing. And I think it's since been questioned of like, maybe it's not exactly right. Maybe it's not exactly perfect. The thing that was really valuable was the research beforehand. Like we came into the design sprint with some context. We weren't just basing it off of stakeholder assumptions. We were really, we had a perspective, based on the research. Then, the really cool thing was that we were able to learn about the culture, the differences in the culture, even though, both English-speaking countries predominantly, both, lots of similar kind of common denominators, there was still a lot of nuance in the cross-cultural experience that we had to consider. And so it was a tremendous learning experience for me. I loved it, but it proved to me that you can do a whole lot more with a lot less time.
Yeah.
Than you think
That's
you can.
great.
Yeah.
Excellent.
Awesome. Well, Justin, this has been a phenomenal conversation. Where can people find you online?
Yeah. And thanks again for having me. This has been great to talk through and hear some of your success stories and your insights. So I'm active on LinkedIn, my personal page, Justin Fischgrund, or business page, Fischgrund Consulting, our website as well, fischgrundconsulting.com. All areas where you'll see lots of insights, posting articles and thoughts in terms of exactly these concepts we talked about here, right? Human-centered design, product thinking, customer-centric approach, especially in the new age with a lot of emphasis on advanced analytics, AI technology.
Folks, you can find me online, drewburdick.com. I write a weekly newsletter on all things customer experience, how you build great experiences. You can also find me on pretty much every social network, Drew H. Burdick. If you're watching this on Spotify, you can watch the video on YouTube or vice versa. And thanks so much again for taking the time. Really enjoyed it and looking forward to continue the conversation.
Of course, thank you again.